Wow. Well, good evening. It is 7 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, and I am so glad that you all have joined us. Take the time right now, if you haven't done so already, to share our virtual book club on your social media platforms and invite other guests to join us as well. We're going to have an exciting, vibrant conversation about the book entitled I Am These Truths by Sunny Hostin. It was an excellent read, and I'm looking so forward to digging into this book with you. I also want to invite those of you who will be our replay viewers. And so when you get the chance to watch this at a time that's convenient for you, thank you as well for joining us. In addition to you being in our live comments tonight, I want to let you know, feel free to add your comments, to give us your questions that you have, and to enter into engagement with us as we discuss this book by Sunny Hostin. Hello, Nicole, my eldest daughter, is in the chat with us, so welcome. For those of you again who are coming for the first time, Kashama, so glad that you have joined us. We got a couple of our Yes Culture worship team members with us tonight. And I also want to let you know that we have some special guests who are going to brave this time and come on screen to converse with me and all of you. And so I want to welcome, and you'll see them in just a little bit, uh, those of you who will be seeing on the screen, Lori Henderson. You'll also see one of our ministers, Minister Vivian Stevens, as well as Monique Perry. And they're going to be answering some of the questions that I've posed that I want all of us to answer. And so tonight, again, this is our launching of C3's very first virtual book club. And I'm so glad to be your host and to have co-hosts who will be joining us. Good evening, Robbie Everett. We are so thankful that you are here. Jacqueline Davis. Yes, the book was an excellent read. I'm so glad that you all enjoyed it. And I want to hear from everyone, at least a few comments from everyone in terms of how you thought this book was in terms of reading it and holding your attention. And so again, before we get started, hello, Monica Hells. Glad to have you with us. Before we get started and dig into the book, I want to lay some ground rules. There's my youngest daughter, Lauren. Felicia Brown, glad to have you. Good evening to you. And of course, my wonderful husband. Hello, handsome. So let's lay some ground rules for tonight. Stephanie Clark, glad you're here. I want to let us know how we can engage with one another. Dr. Lori Hobson, thank you for being on with us as well. Our engagement as we are active in the comment section, and of course for the co-hosts who will be joining me on screen, is going to be deliberate in terms of us having the art of communication. Now, you all know that I'm a teacher, as is Alicia Gaston. Hello, good to see you. Hello, Nancy Perkison, glad to have you with us. The art of communication, and because I love acronyms, this is going to let us know how we are going to converse with one another tonight. First of all, the A stands for active participation. So we want to be active in our conversation with one another. But we also want our conversation to be respectful. And so that's the R in the word art. We're going to be active in our chat, in our conversations as our co-hosts join us, and then in our thoughtful deliberation. So that's the T. And when I say thoughtful deliberation, I mean by that there are going to be some questions, some discussion questions that I will pose to our co-hosts, but I want you to feel free in the chat. If you've read the book, to give your 2 cents as well. And then even if you haven't read the book, but you have questions about what we're talking about, or you can add your own life's experiences and compare what we may be talking about in terms of what the author says to an event or perhaps a thought that you have personally that is in line with what we're discussing. So that's the rules of engagement that I'm laying down or before us. Active participation, respectful communication, and thoughtful deliberation. So let's get started. Again, the book is I Am These Truths by Sunny Hostin, but you'd notice, for those of you that have the book, that there is a subtitle here, and it says A Memoir of Identity, Justice, and Living Between Worlds. And so that subtitle really gives us the crux of what her book is all about, what's running through the book, because it solidifies her sense of identity, her life's purpose of fighting for justice as a federal prosecutor, and also a cable news correspondent, a broadcast journalist, and co-host of The View, and a myriad of jobs. I can't even name them all right now. But if you've read the book, you see that she's had a full life, and she just turned 50 just last year, I believe. And so there are many things that are in this book in terms of her life's experience. But she's saying, I am all of these. I am these truths. And so in my opinion, this book is a candid, truth-telling autobiography that tells Asuncion Cummings Hostin's life story of real struggles and successes from the vantage point of being a Black Latina who discovered that she didn't have to sacrifice any part of her cultural heritage for the sake of what others thought. And so again, for those of you who haven't read the book, I just want to read a little bit about Sunny. There is in the inside flap of the book just a very short bio, and it says Sunny Hostin is a 4-time Emmy Award-winning journalist, executive producer, author, and co-host of ABC's The View. She received her law degree from Notre Dame Law School and her undergraduate degree in communications from Binghamton University. That's in New York. As a federal prosecutor, she was awarded a Special Achievement Award by then Attorney General Janet Reno. A native of New York City, Sunny lives with her husband and 2 children in Westchester County, New York. So that's a very short bio. Of course, on the inside flap, as soon as you open the book, you'll see a longer bio of Sunny and why she wrote this book. She gives her own introduction, of course, but it's a very, very interesting read. And I also saw where some people were putting in the comments that they found this to be an excellent book as well. So what I'm going to do is just get through just a very short synopsis as we go through this book. And so you'll hear me just kind of give a very short or brief summary of the chapters, because there are 11 chapters in all. And then I'm going to be posing a series of discussion questions. And that is when I will pose them to our co-hosts, as well as those of you who want to chime in. And as you chime in, your question or comment will come up on the screen, and we'll be sure to enter those comments in the conversation. Just as Alicia is saying, great read. She took away so many life lessons, and Sunny's story is amazing. I agree with that. And I would also have to underscore what you say, Alicia, that it was a very transparent book as well. The ups, the downs, the triumphs, and the aha moments. And there are and were several of them. And I have to say this to add to what Alicia is saying, that it took courage for Sunny. And you'll notice, as I said before in some of my introductory comments, her full name or her real name is Asuncion. And so that speaks to her Hispanic side. She was Puerto Rican and Black. Her father is Black. Her mother is Puerto Rican. And so that's a part of her living between worlds. And she talks about that certainly throughout the book, not just in terms of her cultural identity, but other ways in which she lived between worlds as well. And so chapter 1, let's dig into that. I already told you that she has African American and Puerto Rican roots. And so the title of chapter 1 is called Boogie Down. And that's not a song, a musical, but it's actually the roots of the city, or the place where she lived, in the Bronx in New York City, in terms of living with her father's side of the family. It was called Boogie Down. And so the Boogie Down in this chapter tells of her family's humble beginnings in the Bronx, and it sets the stage by defining signs of the times. It lets us know when Sonny was born. She was actually 3 years younger than me. And so she was born in 1968, which means she's older than 50, as I said earlier. But it lets us know in that chapter what was going on during the time. So we know what Sonny was born into. Talks about, of course, that being the same year or of the assassinations of Dr. Martin Luther King, as well as Senator Robert F. Kennedy. And then there were protests going on against the Vietnam War, a war that many thought shouldn't have been fought in the first place. There was, of course, the civil rights movement, and coupled with the civil rights movement were Black Power movements. And I see where Monica Hales is saying she grew up in the building in the Bronx. It's Sedgwick Avenue. And so you know this area. And as you read through the book, I'm sure that many of the areas were very familiar with you, since you are from that New York area as well. And so when you read the book, and particularly in this chapter, you find out that Sonny was born to very young parents. In fact, it was love at first sight for her father, whose name was Willie Moses Cummings. Remember, her father was African American. And so his family actually had roots in Georgia, and then they moved to Boogie Down Bronx. And so it was first love at first sight when he saw Sonny's mother, whose name was Rosa Adelaida Besa. And so she was 17 at the time. He was 18. He was a year older than Sonny. He asked her out to a dance. They had fun together, started dating. They were intimate one time, and you can guess what happened. They were expecting a child. And so you have to put into context now, this was in the 60s. And during that time, if you got pregnant, your options were very limited in terms of what was going to be done. They would either, depending on your family that you lived with, some may have thought to send you to live with an aunt in North Carolina or Georgia or something. But for them, there was no other option but to get married. They loved each other, which was wonderful. And so they did get married, but Sonny's mother had to actually drop out of school, and she ended up getting her GED. And Sonny was born just 15 days after they got married on October the 5th. That's when they got married, 1968. Sonny was born on October the 20th. So that chapter again talks about the family dynamics that they had. And I tell you, as is the case with many families, there were wonderful joys, lots of love, but then there were also things going on in the family that caused a lot of drama. Before actually they were living in Boogie Downs, and before Sonny was born, her mother was living in the east section of the Bronx, and that's where she wanted to stay. But she ended up moving in with her in-laws after they got married with Sonny, and there was a strained relationship between she and her mother-in-law, whose name was Mary, and Mary's husband was named Dr. Dash, and yes, Doctor was his real name, and they called him Doc. Sonny's mother's mother was named Nanny, Nanny Virginia, actually, and so that's what she called her, Nanny Virginia, and she called her father's mother, that paternal grandmother, Nanny Mary. So let's go to the first question here. That's a synopsis of that whole chapter. What stories from Sonny's upbringing in Boogie Down either surprised or resonated with you and your own upbringing. And so I'm going to ask one of our co-hosts, Minister Vivian Stevens, to join us. And you see the question on the screen. So for those of you who read the book as well, please chime in if you had something that either resonated with you or surprised you from Sonny's upbringing. What would be your response to that question, Minister Vivian?
So I was really surprised at her response
Mm-hmm.
when her Uncle Ed was stabbed. That really surprised me. At 7 years old, it
Yes.
amazed me that she was so very calm.
Mm-hmm.
Uncle Ed ran into the bathroom,
Right.
Sonny ran behind him,
Yes.
locked the door,
Right.
grabbed some toilet paper,
Mm-hmm.
and tried to apply first aid. So
Yes.
that amazed me at 7 years old that she was so calm and knew what to do. So
Mm-hmm.
the maturity in her was just amazing. It
Yeah.
was
And so it
amazing.
lets us know that there are some things that are innate. There are some things about our character or about our personality that we are just born with. Or we can put it this way, there are some things that are taught and other things that are just caught. And so she had a sensibility about her that caused her to be very calm in situations. And so again, Minister Vivian told you what was going on. Her Uncle Ed was actually her father's younger brother, and he was a Casanova of sorts. He was a ladies' man. Wouldn't you agree, Minister
Yes,
Vivian? And so
yes,
because of that, I mean, he was dating all kinds of people, but he was also dating people that he shouldn't have been dating, like married women. So there was some fault on both his part and the person who was married that knew she shouldn't have been dating him in the first place. And so that's how he got stabbed, actually. It was from
hmm,
someone who was jealous and who said, hey, she's my woman. You had no business being with her. And so he comes into their home. Now, remember, she's living now with her grandma or her nanny, Mary, who is her father's mother, and her husband, Doc. And
hmm,
also her uncle lived there. So it's a
hmm,
crowded room. It was really a two-room place in a tenement building, a high rise, if you will, in New York. And so she comes in and she describes in this book as a 7-year-old, she remembers what was going on vividly. She remembered the color of the floor. You remember, Minister
yes,
Vivian?
hmm,
Black and white tile on that
hmm,
particular bathroom floor. And she walks in and she sees her uncle laying there and just this blood gushing everywhere. And instead of her running or screaming or trying to find help as a 7-year-old, she intuitively kind of knows
hmm,
what to do. So that,
yes.
yeah, I agree with you. Anyone else in the comments that wants to add as well? Anything that resonated with you or surprised you? Let's see. Monica says her story resonated with me because so many of the places she referenced were so familiar, especially the extended families living together back in those days.
Mm-hmm.
Yes. And again, New York is a place, and if any of you have been there, it's a crowded place unless you're in upstate New York. But in the Bronx, in places in Manhattan even, and we'll talk about that because they later moved to Manhattan. But yeah, there are people living on top of people, very, very crowded. And during these times, remember, we're talking about the late 60s, early 70s, and there was we're not in many situations fair housing going on. And so they were living in not the best neighborhood and not the best building in terms of things that were going on. And then the family dynamics, of course. The money was tight. Anything else you want to add, Minister Vivian, in terms of uh, of their family dynamic during those years in Boogie
It's just,
Down
well,
that
I
you
think
remember or that stood out with
just,
you?
just the relationship between her mother and her grandmother on the
Exactly.
father's side.
Yes. And that was
Yeah,
a
the
strange one.
tension,
Again,
the
there
tension.
seemed to be moments when everyone was laughing and joking and playing cards. Here's a game that some of you may play to this day, Bid Whist, talked about that. But then
Yeah.
her mother would be sitting in a corner somewhere
Hmm.
because it seemed as though she was never accepted. Now,
Right.
we're going to get into some of that later because remember, she was of Puerto Rican heritage. And even
Hmm.
though she had to love Black folks, she got involved with the Black man.
Right.
And for those of you who read the book again, you notice how her sonny talks about how her mother was an activist. So she wasn't Black, but she was standing with and for Black people and what they went through. She even wanted to start her own civic engagement forum and her own, civil rights organization, because that's the kind of person. She read books from Martin Luther King and from Malcolm X and the Black Panthers, and she may have been even more knowledgeable than some of us were, because she made it her business to be so. So thank you, Minister Vivian. Well, I could go back and forth with you all day, but we don't have all that time. So again, there was so much that we can add there. And yes, Lori, I will agree. New York City is very crowded. So Rosa and her mother-in-law, as we said, want to underscore, they didn't get along very well. And so because of that, their family ended up leaving to find a much needed place of their own. And they actually moved several times. There were many times. Alicia Gaston said, what resonated with me in my own upbringing was the relationship with her grandmothers, being bullied and being the only person of color in certain educational settings. My goodness, yes. And I would have to agree with you there as well. Alicia Manning is chiming in. She says the story of the Italian guy whose parents didn't allow him to take her to the school dance was quite memorable. We're going to get to that. Yes, ma'am. I'm glad you brought that up. Very memorable. We're going to get there. Yes. And so there were several defining moments in Sonny's young life that occurred as a result of violence. One of them we shared with you. Minister Vivian shared that's what surprised her. The scenario with her helping her uncle who had gotten stabbed. There were other scenarios as well. One such incident involving her best friend Angelique's father. Some of you remember, because I shared with you just a little bit ago that the neighborhood wasn't the best, there were always gunshots and things like that going on, broken glass on her way to school. She talks about that. So many people that she knew who either got hurt or got shot. And this one particular incident, her best friend Angelique got called out because of the fact that her father had just been shot. And then, yes, you're right on point. That's who we're talking about, Kashama, her best friend father's death. So he ended up not just being shot, but dying as a result of that gun wound from just a stray bullet. And so you can see that they weren't living in the best of places. But one of the things that I can say about Sonny's parents is, even though the money was tight, her father had all of these dreams of his own, even after he was a senior in high school, and he wanted to go on and be a doctor, be a medical doctor. But because they had gotten married so young, the dreams that he had of medical school and the dreams that Rosa, who was Sonny's mother, had of starting her own organization and being a teacher, and all of these dreams that she had as well, got put on hold because of Sonny being born to them at such a young age. But there were a lot of things that they would do, as hard pressed as they needed to be, in order to scrape together the money to move from place to place. And the next two places they moved were still in the same area, not too far from her nanny Mary, who was her father's mother again, and Doc, who she adored. But it would be several times that they would end up moving until they got to a place that was in a better neighborhood. So let's move to chapter 2. Chapter 2 was called School Days. And I want to just lump that in with chapter 3, which was called Negrita with the good hair. Negrita with the good hair. I know Lauren is on the chat. So Lauren, can you share, because I know you know a little Spanish, share with everyone what Negrita means. Let me see it in the comments. Negrita. Waiting for it to pop up. And some of you, if you already know what it means, let me see your comments. Let me see your answer. If I don't see it very quickly, I'll just go ahead and tell you what it means. Negrita means little black girl. And so in that particular chapter, as well as in chapter 2, school days, when you read both of those, there it is, Lauren. Uh, See, I was right. There's a little Spanish there, but it was in the book as well, Little Black Girl. But when you read those 2 chapters, you will see, if I could just mesh them together, my title for both of those together would be Jealousy Rears Its Ugly Head. Jealousy rears its ugly head. Sonny's friends from her South Bronx neighborhood called her a traitor for moving. So she moved several times. As I shared before, her family moved in other areas of the Bronx, and then they finally made a move to Manhattan. And she would come home every weekend to visit, of course, her beloved Nanny Mary and Doc, and also her cousins who lived there, and her neighborhood friends. So she'd come there to spend the night and stay Saturday and Sunday before going back home to go to a better school in Manhattan. And so they continued to taunt her when she returned there to visit her father's side of the family. And then she found herself then navigating between 2 worlds. So remember, she had this dual cultural identity as being both Black and Hispanic, as being African American and Puerto Rican. And so all of the things that go along with that. But then she also found herself navigating between these socioeconomic worlds, because her family had scraped together the money needed to move to a better place for the sake of giving their child a better chance at education and her dreams manifesting. And so I think that should be the desire, again, of any parent. I know it was and is for myself and my husband. We've always said that we wanted our children to do better than us. We wanted them to be able to manifest things that perhaps we didn't even manifest in our own lives. Monica Hale says, those chapters reminded me of the barrel of crabs. Ooh, that's one of my favorite things to do, is to eat seafood, particularly crabs as well. But she's not talking about that. The barrel of crabs that she's referring to is, of course, I believe, the crab in the bucket mentality. And for some of you that may not understand what that means, there are some people in life that don't want to see you do well. And so they will do whatever they can to pull you back to where they are. There was one of the things that we say often, my husband and I, and Pastor Leslie, others, and those of you who are Calvary members, you've heard us say this, and it's because it's been said from the pulpit. In terms of those who are your friends or your associates, it may get to the point where you have to realize this and perhaps say to them, if you can't grow with me, you can't go with me. Lori says that good hair was probably also a problem with her African-American family members. Yes, but here is the thing. It wasn't so much of a problem with her cousins. Her cousins loved it. Her cousins, and she shares this in the book, would play with her hair, some of you, I'm dating myself and Sonny and those of you who can relate. You remember the show, The Brady Bunch? And so again, yes, my best friend Alicia is on crab mentality. It's sad but true. Yes, I agree. But in the case of Sonny's cousins, they would brush and comb her hair and fix it in all of these styles. And one of the styles she said that they loved to fix it in was so that it would look like Cindy Brady. Y'all remember Cindy Brady, the blonde one in the square of the Brady Bunch, who wore her hair in 2 pigtails? And Sonny always said she didn't understand the fascination that everybody had with her hair, but they loved it. She didn't understand why they couldn't go out in the rain and she could. But yeah, we do. She came to understand. Palo Malo, bad hair. That's exactly right. Showed up on both sides. Exactly right. And so Sonny was constantly in between, navigating between what people thought about her, whether it was her hair, because that word negrita, little black girl, was something that was said on her Puerto Rican side of the family. And so she didn't go to Puerto Rico often with her family, but they would, when they did have enough money to go, it was the fact that Sonny says she was always the darkest whenever she was with her Puerto Rican family. And then when she was with her father's side of the family, she was always the lightest. And then, of course, her hair was the curliest in many situations with a Puerto Rican family. And again, it was curly, but it seemed to be straighter than those with her African American family. So she was always going through these kinds of things. But then there's some horrific things that happened that were shared, particularly in these chapters as well with Sunny, and we'll get to that. But I want to share this: the self-reflection and acceptance that she shared on page 21 was very transparent, and it was a very relatable moment for me as well. So she was very courageous. She talked about the things that really existed even within her own cultures, whether it was African American or the Hispanic culture. And we know that as something called colorism, or not inter, but intra cultural racism. Because yes, there are some racist ideologies and words that are spoken, and perhaps actions that are committed that are within a race against our own people, whether that is with African Americans or with the Hispanic culture. So we know that intercultural relations, not intercultural racism rather, exists with again, systemic racism, white privilege. But intracultural racism talks about and really underscores the fact that there are hangups on the complexion, the color that people may have within a particular race, the hair, the nappiness or the kinkiness or the curly texture or the straight hair within a particular cultural context. And so those things are real. And she was very candid and transparent in relaying that. So another thing that we find out in these particular chapters is that education did not just occur in school for Sunny. Trips to museums, as well as reading books and newspapers, were bedrocks that provided an avenue of escape to worlds that would have otherwise been unknown. One of the things that stood out to me was that her father would have Sunny, even before she was entering into kindergarten. She learned how to read very, very early as a preschooler. And so her father had her reading the New York Times. Her mother had her, again, learning all kinds of things and had her reading on a second grade level before she entered into kindergarten. And so education was a core value of this family, even though, remember, her parents had to give up their own dreams and didn't end up going to college because of the fact that they wanted to ensure that their daughter, Sunny, whose name was Asuncion, had everything that she needed in order to be successful. So here is, let's see, question number 2. Did we skip over that? Yeah. Before we get to question number 3, question number 2 is this: what lessons did Sunny learn as a young girl in Boogie Down that shaped her character and nature in her professional career as an adult? What lessons did Sunny learn as a young girl in Boogie Down that shaped her character and nature in her professional career as an adult? Let's have Monique, our co-host on the screen, join us for that answer to that question. Welcome, Monique.
Well, thank you.
Glad to have you with us. As you read through that chapter, what again were some lessons that you think that followed Sunny from her childhood to her adulthood as a result of her time in Boogie Down before she moved to Manhattan?
So I think one of the incidents that happened early in her
Mm-hmm.
life was what Minister Vivian mentioned about the incident with her uncle Ed,
Yes.
where she was able to keep calm and administer first aid as
Mm-hmm.
best she could as a 7-year old.
Exactly.
Um, that's one of the things that I believe shaped her. In a tool that she was able to use in her professional career.
Mm-hmm.
In order to get resolve or to find a solution, she
Sure.
realized that when everyone else was running amok and just um, everybody's at their wits end,
Yeah.
she knew to just be quiet, be still, and she would be able to come up with a solution. And
Excellent.
that has helped her later on, in her professional career.
Mm-hmm.
So
Mm-hmm.
I think that was one of the things that she learned very early in life, that really shaped her into the person that she is to this day.
Excellent. Thank you for that. I agree with all of that. And
Hmm.
I would add as well, because of the fact that she was in a neighborhood that wasn't one of the best to be living
Right.
in, she learned how to deal with all kinds of people. And as a
Exactly.
federal prosecutor later on in life, and as working for the U.S. Supreme Court, working for the DA in D.C.
Right.
as well as federal prosecutor, she learned how to into the home environments of those persons who were in the best of neighborhoods
That's
as
right.
well. Whereas her counterparts, her colleagues, whether there were other lawyers, whether it was defense attorneys or other prosecutors, were afraid to go into those areas. And
Right.
she expressed that she was never afraid because it felt like home to her.
Hmm.
It
Hmm.
was comfortable. She knew how to kind of like Paul said, he knew how to be abased and he knew how to abound. She knew how to relate on the level of whoever she was talking to
Hmm.
without belittling or being condescending. And so there
That's
were
right.
areas, again, that she brought from her childhood into her adulthood, in all of her careers, really. And so she didn't allow what some people would say as the maybe the worst of a neighborhood or a situation to get the best of her. She
Hmm.
took, as they say, lemons and made lemonade. She
Hmm.
used what she learned so that it benefited not only her, but her clients and those that she was serving in her fight for justice.
Absolutely. Hmm.
Yeah,
Hmm.
thank you so much, Monique.
Hmm.
Let's move very quickly to question number 3. And again, if any of you also have anything to add, as I see Alicia does, she learned how to effectively code switch. Yes, indeed, how to be both tenacious and resilient, and how to control her emotions. Now, here, that terminology I love because she shared it a couple of times in the book. And for those of us who are of the African American persuasion, or any other people of color persuasion, code switching is something that is familiar to you too. And maybe you have not heard it said that way, but switching literally means that you know how to be one way with those who are like you, and then you know that you have to be another way when you're around the dominant culture. And so I can't tell you, I can't even count the number of times that I've had to do that. And I'm certain that many or most of us have had to do that, because you may feel very comfortable around persons that you grew up with, persons that are of your particular hue or cultural identity or persuasion. But then when you are thrust in other environments, whether it is because of your education or because of your work environment, you have to, again, know the lingo, know the language, know the systems. And so it's called code switching. There were people in perhaps our families or in our amongst our ancestry who were able to, like Sharina says, adapt to all situations. Let me say this, because as Sunny was being very candid, we want to be very candid in our conversations with one another tonight as well. There were people in who were Black uh, in the times before we were born, who knew how to pass, quote unquote, pass. For those of you who may be joining us and you don't know what I mean by that, that meant that they may have been Black and maybe had been mixed with another identity, as Sunny was and is. And because of that, their skin and or their hair was of the complexion or the texture where they could pass as another culture to get a better job, to get better benefits, And many of them did that. I will share with you. Well, let's see what Lori is saying. I used to feel like I had to speak two languages after I went to college. One when I went home to Brooklyn, and another at school and in professional settings. That's exactly right. And I can identify with that as well. It's called code switching. And as I was saying, others were passing when they could. And my grandmother's sister, my Aunt Anna, before she died, my family and I loved being in her presence at her house. She had the best cooking. She was very fair skinned. And she told me stories when I was a little girl of how people in our family, from my father's mother's family and her sisters, would sometimes pass because they could get a better job, because they had better opportunities, they could get better housing. But then she said at night they would come back over, cross the quote unquote railroad track, so to speak. And if they wanted to have fun and be with their own people, they came back at night. And so again, some would say that's so wrong to do, but you don't know unless your feet are in those kinds of shoes. And so we're not here to judge tonight, but just here to simply state the facts. Code switching, passing was real. There are some people who are perhaps still doing that. So let's go on. Let's see. We are on question number 3. In what other ways did Sonny's parents emphasize and demonstrate the importance of education in their home? In what other ways did Sonny's parents emphasize and demonstrate the importance of education in their home? Let's bring up Minister Vivian again to answer that question, one of our co-hosts.
So she said that education was at the forefront of all of their conversations
Yes.
and their activities.
Mm-hmm.
And she said the books were her first form of recreation. That was amazing.
I love it.
Recreation.
Yes.
For recreation.
Mm-hmm.
That's amazing. And she also said she doesn't remember a time when she didn't know how to read.
Mm-hmm. It came as naturally to her as breathing. And there are some who are just born with a certain propensity for things. Like I said, some things are taught and other things are caught. My grandsons, I love them both, and they both have different propensities for different things. I believe that Phil is going to be a master musician and singer. I see it, I hear it, I know it to be true. He loves everything about worship and song and playing instruments. And Jack is a little bit of everything as well. But one of the things that he has is a propensity he is already reading at a second grade level, and he's only a little over 2.5. He'll be 3 in May. Yeah, he'll be 3 years old. And so, again, some things are just inherent. I didn't mean to cut you off. You can go ahead and continue, Minister Vivian.
So she said her mom chose to stay at home.
Yes.
But she didn't want Sonny in the daycare. And so she watched her mom attend college to be a teacher. So that was centered around education. And while her mom studied, she would color and practice her ABCs.
Yes.
Another thing her mom did, her mom would go to a teacher store and pick up workbooks.
Yes.
And she would assign Sonny lessons from the workbook. What she would do, and another thing, they would go to the library. Sonny would pick out books. Her mom would ask her who was her favorite character. She asked Sonny to summarize the book.
Yes.
And I mean, everything was centered around education. And as you said earlier, her dad would have her read the newspaper to him, and he would quiz her on what she had read. So, and any words that she didn't understand, he had her sound them out and look up what she didn't understand. So she used the dictionary at a young age.
Yes, I love it. I found myself identifying with so much of what Sunny
I did
shared,
too.
because I come from a family of educators. My mother was an educator, public school. She retired from the public school, taught at the same school, Booker Elementary, third grade, over 25 years. And then she came to teach for us at Calvary Christian Academy, which was her dream, teaching in a Christian school. But I can remember her doing some of the same things with us. And she wouldn't just teach from workbooks, but she would teach from real life as well. My older sisters got all of the cooking and the sewing lessons, but when it came to me, she would teach me administrative things, and critical thinking skills. And I loved to read. I mean, I would almost lick up anything I could get my hands on. And I can remember trying to teach my brother Greg to read at the time. And he was only 2 years younger than me. I wasn't even in kindergarten yet, but he was not having it. And so there was this love for education, because in a way, just like Sunny, it became a way of escape in a good way, in terms of reading about places that you didn't even know existed. And then it opened up or broadened your mind and your understanding. And one of the things, one of several things that I even taught my daughters when they were younger, all of them were reading before they were in kindergarten, when they were just 3 and 4 years old. But I also taught them that if you ever come across a word that you don't understand, look it up in the dictionary immediately. Of course, we didn't have smartphones back then, so you couldn't just pull up the dictionary app. They had real encyclopedias, just like I had growing up, and dictionaries. And I instilled in them, I believe, a love for learning, and a love for reading. So much so that during the summers, I had them do book reports. And again, it gave them a love for reading, but it also taught them writing skills and critical thinking skills. So yeah, education was just like the back of their hand. It was that natural to them. It's a wonderful thing to see. Thank you for sharing that. Did you have anything else to add?
Yeah, I can relate to Sunny as far as reading because, as you said, my mom bought me encyclopedias, and I would
Yeah.
actually study the encyclopedia when I grew up. And even in one of my English classes, we had this tier of they called it SRO, and my teacher at the time, I was actually the first one to finish the tiers in reading, and he was a neighbor of my sister, so he told my sister how good I was in reading, so that encouraged me as a young kid. Yeah.
Wonderful. Wow, wow. So we see we can relate to many of the things that Sunny shared. And I'm sure those of you who are joining us in the comments as well, this was such a relatable book in many, many ways. So thank you again, Mrs. Vivian, for sharing from your perspective. Let's move on to question number 4. And I tell you what, so you can get ready. I'm going to pose this to Lori Henderson, who is also joining us as one of our co-hosts. But this question says, what influence did Sunny's third grade teacher and mentor, Ms. Lopez, have in her life at the school at St. Anselm? What influence did Sunny's teacher and mentor, Ms. Lopez, have in her life at St. Anselm? I see where Lauren said that I tricked them into becoming obsessive readers. That's something I'm sure they're happy about now, though. I tricked them. I love it. So, Lori, there she is. Welcome. So glad you could join us. So that question I posed to you, number 4.
Yeah, number 4. I put down that she reshaped her future because the additional work that she would give her, because Sunny was always answering the questions. So Lopez reshaped her future by giving her those standardized testing and having her moved up from the 3rd grade to the 5th grade.
Exactly.
So that was really good. And how teachers do that, still do that today, I'm sure, because they did it with my brother in the same way. You said, oh, he's bored. That's why he's not paying attention. They moved her, and that was really good. And I hope teachers continue to do that.
Exactly. Thank you. And I want to say this, because sometimes even if teachers won't, parents, you are the first advocate for your children.
Right.
I shared that because for my firstborn, Nicole, I already knew from my own upbringing what it felt like to finish an entire year of curriculum early and to be bored out of your mind because the teachers won't move you to the next grade. And so I didn't want her to feel that way. And so I knew, as her parent and really her first mentor and teacher, and from teaching her myself, I knew she knew everything in the first grade curriculum as well as in the second grade curriculum at the time. So I went to her teacher, and I also went to the principal of the school where she was, and I asked if it were possible for her to be moved, and they refused. And so again, because they refused, her father and I made an executive decision to move her to another school after we met with that school first, of course, with the principal of that school and with who her teacher would be in the third grade. And then we were confident. We said, test her, because, you know, I'm sure you may hear from a lot of parents who say this about their children, but I want you to be able to assess what I know to be true, and then you confirm it. And so they tested her, and she passed with flying colors everything that would have been in the second grade. The only thing that she didn't know was Roman numerals, and that was a quick and easy fix. But everything else she passed. And so because that school was able to pass her from the first to the third grade, we moved her out of the school that said they couldn't do it and into the school that said they would, because we wanted what was best for her. Her social development could handle it. And so that wasn't a question, but we didn't want her to be bored and to be unchallenged. So again, another thing that I and my family could identify with in terms of what Sonny was going through was that there are teachers who will see and can see the potential in you. But even if you have teachers who don't, parents, you are the first ones who can make that decision, executive decision, if you need to do what is best for your child so that they can continue to soar. So thank you for that, Lori. Did you have anything else that you want to add?
No, that was it.
All right, very good. We'll call on you soon. Thank you so much. As Lori shared, and moving to a better school on the Upper East Side of Manhattan, and the school was called Immaculate Conception, where she was a student from the 5th to the 8th grade. And then shortly after that, their family would move to Manhattan's East Village. And then, as soon as I read that, well, you may know what cued in my mind was the theme song for the Jeffersons. Oh, well, we're moving on up. You all remember that song? To the east side, to a deluxe apartment in the sky, because that's exactly what they did. They finally got a little piece of the pie. And so her mother, Rosa, had to devise and execute a strategy to secure a better apartment for their multi-hued family. And for those of you who have the book, you can read about that from pages 28 to 32. But I found that an interesting story, because during the time, she had to do something to get a better quality of housing or an apartment for her family, because all of the other places where they went, the better quality places always went to the white people during that time. And so here, remember, we talked about code switching and we talked about passing. And so she had to do what she had to do. And these were some of the things that she did in order to secure that apartment. This was where her family, her mother and her sisters were near this area as well. So she wanted to be in that area. And so she changed her name, not legally, but she changed her name from being Rosa to Rose, and didn't go by Besa, but Cummings was her husband's last name. But instead of putting on the application Willie Moses, which was his actual name, Willie Moses Cummings, she called him William Cummings, and she left him at home. Now you can guess why she left him at home, because she already knew that if they saw him, they were going to say that the apartment was no longer available. And so she completed the application. She left both Sonny at home, and she left her husband at home. And she got the apartment just on the merits of her completing the application and putting her husband's information on that and his name, so that it became more, and I'll call it this, anglicized. Instead of Willie Moses, it was William Cummings. And instead of Rosa, Adelaida Besa, it was Rose Cummings. And so lo and behold, they got the apartment. And then what was funny to me is when they all showed up, of course, the person who gave them the keys was like, "Who are you? Who is this?" And she told them, "This is my husband and this is our daughter." And so he couldn't go back on his word, but they had that apartment because she did what she needed to do. She code switched and got a better place for their family. So question number 5. Sonny attended Dominican Academy, which was closer now to Manhattan, but it still was a subway ride away. And so she attended this school, Dominican Academy, after passing the entrance exam, entering high school now at age 12. Can you imagine? What was special about this particular school? So much so that her parents insisted that she attend. What was special about this particular school, so much so that her parents insisted that she attend? And then what role did Sister Timothy play in Sonny's life? Can you put that comment up again that was just on the screen? I didn't get a chance to read it. Let me see what that comment was. I see Kashama says that they made it a family affair. Definitely can relate to family together to get the job done. That's exactly right. And Arlisha says, as parents, we must be advocates for our children's education. Exactly. We are the number one advocates. In fact, parents are to work in concert with teachers, administrators, principals, and they are really to assist us as parents. But parents, whether you know it or not, you are the first teacher or teachers that your children will ever have. So I want to bring up Lori again to answer this question. Again, the question is, and then some of you can answer it as well. What was special about this particular school? Here it is on the screen, so that her parents insisted that she attend. And then what role did Sister Timothy, who was one of the nuns and was an instructor, what role did she play in Sonny's life? Let's bring up co-host Lori. There she is. Okay, what would you answer that according to your perspective? What would your answer be?
I first keyed on that her father's colleague told him about the school.
Mm-hmm.
I think about that, he started working at Palmolive. I don't know if it was factory or whatever, but when he's there, the colleague said, check out this school.
Right.
So highly recommended. And then he fell in love with the place, but it sounded like it was opulent and in Park Avenue, and it was in a, high ritzy area of New York. So
exactly.
that was something that he wanted, because he always wanted best for his daughter. It was like Park Avenue in Madison. Mm-hmm. And I think about Green Acres when I hear about Park Avenue.
Oh, yeah.
That was an exclusive.
I remember that show.
Yeah. So that was an exclusive zip code in New York. So, and he wanted the best for his daughter. But it was the finest Catholic school. One of the finest girls' Catholic school.
Yes.
And they had the Catholic religion, and it was all girls. So I'm pretty sure he liked that.
Yes.
So
a father would, wouldn't he?
Yes. Exactly. But he didn't even go in. He saw it and he liked it, and that's what but she loved it. I love the fact that she reminds me of someone who wanted to walk the red carpet every day, go up to the stairs. And then
because they had when she says walk the red carpet, she's not speaking figuratively. They actually had a wide red carpet and a grand staircase and a colonnade. So you would walk in, and it was this huge, almost like a cathedral. That's how she describes it. And you had this courtyard inside the building, columns, pillars, marble floors, and the quality education. So it wasn't just the best parochial education or school in the area. It was one of the best in the entire country. And so what you said was actually, right, spot on, because I think it was the fact that not just that he liked what he saw, but those recommendations from the people that he worked with and others about the quality of education they had, and the girls who came out as a result or graduated from that school, and the things that they were able to be or accomplish spoke to him. And then I would add to it that it wasn't just the academics of that school, but it was also the fact that they taught social skills, they taught etiquette.
Oh, yes.
And so that reminded me again, my mind went back to my own mother. And so this may sound silly to some of you, but my mother had myself and my sisters walking around the house with an encyclopedia on our head. And you may say, what? Why? Because she was teaching us how to walk gracefully, how to have the correct or right posture, how to have our shoulders back and our heads forward and our toes pointed in the right direction. So here's a phrase you may have heard. So you wouldn't walk slew-footed. But again, so that you would again know how to walk and carry yourself with poise. And so my mother would do those kinds of things. Remember, I shared she was an educator as well. So it wasn't just the academics that she made sure that we had, but it was the knowing, especially daughters, how to set a table, those kinds of things. And that's what Sonny shared as well, that this school taught, knowing exactly how to set the silverware or the flatware on the table, and then where to start when you eat. You always work yourself from the outside in rather than from the inside out, with the salad fork and your dinner fork, and if you have a cocktail fork and your dessert utensils and your knife and your fork, and you start from the outside in and where your drinks go. And I remember teaching my daughters so that they wouldn't forget. I would have them hold up their left hand and do it like this so that it makes a lowercase b, and then hold up this hand so it makes a lowercase d. And then they would know when they set the table, bread plate always goes on the left, and the drinks or the glasses always go on the right. That's something that I got from my mother. So Lori Hobson says, my mother would slap me between my shoulder blades to make me stop slouching. Well, there's another way you could do it. And so, again, there were these things, these maybe unwritten rules and cultural mores that we had to, or mores that we had to learn or needed to learn if you were wanting to move to a broader society. That's a part of knowing how to code switch as well.
Yes.
Because you're not going to, if you grew up on chitlins, and I'm not saying anything is wrong with it. I don't eat them, but some people love them. And if that's fine, but there may be a time where you have to go to an elegant or a state dinner or a function that calls for dignitaries to be there, and you need to learn how to eat what's in front of you properly, using the right utensils. And so those things need to be taught. They're not just automatically done. So thank you for that. I see where Alicia Jones says, Dr. Natalie, I remember having to put that encyclopedia on top of my head. Thank you. So we weren't the only ones. So I would learn how to walk gracefully. And I don't know why out of all my sisters, I always would get the heaviest encyclopedia. Oh my goodness. I can relate. My goodness. Anything else you wanted to add, Lori?
Yeah, also when they would go to father-daughter dances on Tavern on the Green, I'm sure all of that came in handy. And
indeed.
From social settings. But you also Sister Timothy, excuse me.
Yes.
The school principal. And I like the fact that even though she caught them at not the bakery,
at the diner.
The diner, yeah. I thought she was good for her too, but she guided her and she made her live up to her potential. And that's what she told her. I want you to live up to your potential. So
exactly. So she was like Miss Lopez from her former school, in terms of seeing what was in her. And even when what Lori is talking about is Sonny was a bit of a mischievous one too. So she would be the one who was doing the scheming and have others to join her. And so she said she realized in the book that she would get the same number of demerits if she missed a minute from the tardy bell. If she was a minute late, or if she was a whole hour late and missed homeroom. So she decided, well, I might as well go for the whole shebang. Let's all just go out to the diner and have us a nice meal. And on one particular day when she did that, lo and behold, Sister Timothy was right there. They got caught red-handed. But again, she suffered the consequence in terms of having detention, but even the detention at that school was a learning
That's right.
moment, an opportunity.
Polish the silver. She had to polish
exactly.
silver.
She sure did. So again, she saw what was in her, and she wasn't going to let her waste her potential. She actually assisted her in making better decisions.
And I do like how, I don't know how much people do it now, but she did say on that first day after she polished the silver and had to go to the principal's office, her mom and dad were waiting for her. And she knew how hard and how much money they spent to get her in that school.
Exactly.
And she never wanted to do that to them again. So that speaks a lot about her.
She didn't want to disappoint them.
Yeah.
Sharina Clark says, one thing I did like about Sunny is she held herself accountable. Exactly right. And that's what Lori was sharing as well. So it seemed that even at her young age, she knew how to make, even though she did some things that were wrong, but she also knew how to make the corrections in order to go and to follow a right path or a better path. She had fun along the way too, especially in her college days. But again, all of those things were able to shape her into the person that she is now. And I noticed that some of the things, because when she would share about her long subway rides, and then she would you would hear the perspective of when she had to do it, because even though she was afraid of riding the subway, especially in New York, and that was during the time when they hadn't had the campaign to clean up all the subways, clean all the graffiti off. Those were the days when there were people who were riding those subway cars who were criminals, who had horrible intentions and motives, and some of that she shared in the book as well, which we'll get to. But she also would stand back, and you would hear her perspective then and then now as a mother, and how she would not dare let her children ride the subway, but she had no choice then because it was 50 blocks. And some of the things she encountered, there was a point where she was afraid to get back on the subway, and she just decided to walk 50 blocks to school. So we'll get to that in just a little bit. In fact, that's our next question. Question number 6. Unless you had something else to add. Did you get a chance to finish? Okay,
yes.
Well, thank you, Lori.
Yes, thank you.
Thank you. So question number 6 is this. There were 3 traumatic incidents that happened to Sunny while riding the subway on her daily commute to the Dominican Academy. How did Sunny respond? Let's bring up Monique, co-host Monique, to answer that question. There were 3 traumatic incidents that happened to Sunny while riding the subway on her daily commute. How did she respond to those incidents? So and it's up to you if you want to share what those incidents were.
Okay. So 2 of the incidents I remember, she basically was assaulted.
She was, yes.
She was assaulted by a man that continued every time she, rode on the train. He pressed up against her real tightly, and
she didn't know what was going on at the time.
Exactly.
Remember, she was young. Yes,
that's right. And it wasn't until she got home, and realized what he had done, I'm sure that disturbed her, but because she never. I think she said she put her uniform in the cleaners and forgot about it, and just never wore that one again.
Exactly.
And then another incident was these young girls around her age jumped her, and they constantly bullied her. Every time she rode the train, they were constantly calling her names, and and so one day they decided that they were going to jump her, and they cut her hair.
Yes.
And so when she was in the principal's office and her parents were called, she decided not to tell who did that to her. And so she just decided that she didn't want it to get worse. If she had told who those girls were, she feared that they may come after her again and things might be even worse. So she decided to be silent on that. and just held it in. So, and I don't remember what the third incident was.
Well, actually, there were two incidents at first before her hair was cut, where she was assaulted. There was the one man who was pressing up against her,
Right.
as you shared, and without being too graphic, I'll just share that you all remember the incident that happened with President Clinton and the young lady who saved the dress with something on it.
Right.
That's why Sonny put her uniform. She didn't know why her uniform was wet. So that's why she put it in the cleaners. But it wasn't until afterwards that she realized what this man was doing, who was behind her and
Right.
moving behind her. And so you
Exactly.
all can fill in the blanks. And then there was another man who just had touched her on her backside. So it was actually two assaults. And then it was the incident that happened on the subway, the third incident with the girls. And here's the interesting thing. These were girls that didn't go to her same school,
Right.
but they were following her. They were taunting her every time she was on the subway. And then this one particular day, before they cut her hair, they were very quiet. And when she assessed it, she said she should have known that they were up to something and that they had planned something, because who would have just scissors randomly with them? And so they waited for the opportune time before she got off on her stop to go to school, and they held her down and cut off one of her her hair at that time was like almost down to her waist, and they cut off one of her plaits. And so she was mortified by that. But I believe, and some of you may be aware of this, there's a certain street code. You remember she grew up in the Bronx. And I know I've heard this phrase, snitches get stitches.
Right.
So it was that kind of thing where she feared, as you said, Monique, that things would get worse, because once she got to the school and she shared with her principal, and then of course not only were her parents called, but they called the police, and they were asking her to identify these women. One thing was that she really didn't see their face because of the fact that they were holding her down. She couldn't remember any identifiable marks about them. She just knew that some of them were Black and some of them were Hispanic. And that was interesting to me, because she was, remember, of the same cultural identity. But yet there was this jealousy thing. So they had been watching her all that time. They probably thought that she was cute, was of a different complexion, even though there were Hispanic girls in the group along with Black girls. But they decided that they were just going to make fun of her and do whatever they could do to show her that she's not better than them. So again, there was this intercultural racism, this colorism rather, that was inside this event, even at that young age. And so there are a lot of things that cropped up in my mind when I read this. One is that as parents, and particularly parents of, not just parents of daughters, but parents of sons, we need to have the conversation with our children about their bodies, about having a respect for their bodies themselves, but also making sure that they know that other people need to respect their body. And if they're ever in a situation where, again, they feel like they are being watched, or someone wants to assault them, make some noise. If there's anyone that you can call out to, if you're ever in a situation like that, say something. Don't just keep it to yourself. And so we have to, I think, have those conversations with our children at an early age, so that they aren't so naive as to not know what's going on around them.
Right.
That's one conversation. And then the other conversation is to allow our children to know that God makes all of us differently, and that's a beautiful thing. Diversity is beautiful. The different hues and colors that we come in is beautiful. That every race is and should be equal to one another, even though others may think contrary to that. But we need to teach them not just about the reality of what is happening with racism or prejudices, but also teach them who they are, and to be proud of who they are, and not to cower because of that, or to mistreat others just for the sake of their skin color or their hair texture, or any of that. So there are conversations that I believe that need to be had between parents and their children. Anything else that you wanted to add?
No, that's it.
Okay. Well, thank you so much. Thank you so
Mm-hmm.
much. We're winding down a little bit. Let's see. Okay. Now, I'll say this. I appreciate the frankness shared in addressing the reality of intercultural racism or colorism, because it wasn't just in this chapter, but it was throughout the book, even in many of the jobs that Sunny had at different networks. And as an attorney, she shared about, instances where she still was navigating between different worlds. And then again, this is one thing that I want to say. Racism, I believe, is taught and modeled before it's passed down or poured into others. And then it becomes learned behavior. Now, Alicia Manning had alluded earlier to something that surprised her about the Italian American friend that Sonny had by the name of Eddie. Eddie Velarde was his name. And so it was an incident that happened with him when she was 13 years old, where he had invited her to a dance. And then when he went home and his mother found out that he was going to this dance with this Black Puerto Rican girl, she told him, no, we don't do that kind of thing. And the way she phrased it was that this is exactly what she said. She said it this way: black cats don't screw birds, and vice versa. So with that, the boy didn't know what she meant, but he just repeated what his mother said to Sonny. And then she was wondering, what in the world are you talking about? And there happened to be another friend that was there who explained it. And this friend wasn't even Black or Puerto Rican. He was of another persuasion. I think he was Irish. And so he said, that's okay, Sonny. He's stupid. And his parents are too, because you're a beautiful girl. Will you go to the dance with me? And then they wrote, instead of really saying rode off into the sunset, I guess they kind of did, because he gave her a ride on his handlebars of his bike in front of the kid, Eddie, who said that he couldn't take her to the dance because his mother wouldn't allow it. And so they left him standing there, and they went to the dance and had a good time. And then Sonny says, well, this friend was cuter than Eddie anyway. But again, it just lets you know that even children, as naive as they are, they become racist, not just because they're born that way, but it may be taught to them by a previous generation, and then it becomes learned behavior. So that's why we have to have conversations, I believe, with our children when they're younger. So we move now to chapter 4, and chapter 4 is called I Am What I Am. And that's when she's talking about her Black and Puerto Rican heritage. And she was saying she didn't think she would need to choose, even though other people thought that she needed to choose between the two, become one or the other. It's kind of like in America, and you may have heard this, there's this one drop rule. And it happened during again, as a result of slavery, and even went on during Reconstruction and the Jim Crow days and beyond. If you've got one drop of Black blood, then you're considered Black. And so even in many situations where she found herself in, people were asking her to choose. Are you Black or are you Hispanic? It was like they couldn't accept the dual identity that she was. And so that's pretty much what that chapter was talking about. And she was giving several examples of how she had conversations with Anna Navarro, who didn't know her Hispanic side and had made judgment calls before she came to a realization of who she really was. And then she ended up apologizing, and others as well. So let's move into question 7. Question 7, and I'll bring Monique up again. How does it feel when you finally receive validation in terms of your self-worth and accomplishments? How does it feel, Monique?
Well, it's very gratifying to know that you're valued, and that what you bring to the table means something, not just yourself, but
exactly,
to be appreciated. And I think it's very important. And I've received that on the home front, from my parents at a young age.
Sure.
As well as on my job. I've been on my job for about 36 years. I work for the Department of Energy, and I work with mostly all men.
Sure.
And they're constantly letting me know how much they appreciate me. If I've uh, accomplished a task and did it well, they're always letting me know that they couldn't have done it without me. And it's very, I'm very modest. Whenever I receive, kudos but I am just bubbling inside.
Yes,
They
indeed.
really don't know. I am really just bubbling inside because you feel like you did a good job,
Sure.
you know, and to have other people, other colleagues to validate a job well done, you can't help but to feel very good inside.
That is so
Because,
true.
like I said, you have something to offer. You can bring something to the table, and you want people to appreciate your input, what you bring to the table, and it makes you know that you're on the right track, and it makes you want to continue to contribute.
Exactly. I would
So
agree
it's very
wholeheartedly.
necessary. It's very necessary to have that.
It
Yeah,
is.
and
It
it
is.
builds your
And so that lets us
confidence.
know we need to surround ourselves with those who think well of us. And that's not to
Absolutely.
say to have people kowtowing to us or that we have to have sycophants or those who are just yes people around us.
Right.
But it helps to have people who recognize you first, who you are as an individual, and then who also recognize what you do or the accomplishments or the achievements that you have, and especially in the workplace. So it is
Absolutely.
gratifying. It bolsters our self-esteem. Wouldn't you agree? Just as
Yes,
you said, you
absolutely.
feel you might not show it so much on the outside, but
Right.
inside you are dancing,
Exactly.
just bubbly.
Exactly.
Particularly when
Hmm.
you get that kind of validation from those who, again, are the head of your department, or you may be the head of your department, or your fellow or sister colleagues that recognize that, and then
Hmm.
vice versa. Because I believe that to get respect, we have to give that as well. But
That's
then
right.
I know that and then realize that there are people who may be in situations where they don't get that kind of validation
Hmm.
at their workplace. So what do you do then? You have to become, I would say, your first cheerleader. And that is, you have to know what you bring to the table. And then when you do, you let your work speak for you.
That's
You
right.
become excellent at
Hmm.
whatever it is that you do and that you do well, so that you are the person who brings that niche of expertise in
Hmm.
your particular field or in your particular area of specialty. And again, people may not like us for who we are if they don't really know us, but they can't again deny the quality of work that
Hmm.
you do or
Exactly.
the achievements that you've had. And so even when people don't recognize it, because let's face it, everybody's not going to give us a pat on the back,
Right.
we have to know again
Hmm.
who we are and what we bring to the table, and then see ourselves as God sees us, even when
Exactly.
people don't. And then if they don't, surround yourself with those who do.
Absolutely.
Anything else you
Absolutely.
want to add to that?
No, no.
Excellent, excellent. Thank you for that. Thank you. So here we go on in the next chapter. It talks about in the system, but not of it. And this is where she is moving from job to job, and she has had several places of employment that she has gone through. But all the while she was searching for her purpose. And I say that because for those of you who read the book, you realize as she shares the story that it was her mother who wanted her to be a lawyer. She didn't quite really know what she wanted to do, but she always resonated with being a journalist. So she knew that being a journalist would eventually get her to an area of satisfaction or where she felt like she was walking in purpose, and particularly because she wanted to fight for those whose voices were not heard. And so she decided to be a prosecutor, which eventually led to her being a broadcast journalist, which was really her sweet spot on top of being a prosecutor. And the interesting thing is, she also shared that in all the cases that she had as a federal prosecutor, she never lost a case. She won every single case. And so my question is, given the fact that her mother was living vicariously through her, and even when she told her mother about her dream of being on television, her mother shot that down and really gave her the idea first of being a lawyer, and that's how she ended up going to Notre Dame's law school. But here's the question: have you ever followed someone else's dream as Sonny did, rather than pursuing your own? Have you ever followed someone else's dream other than pursuing, or rather than pursuing your own? Let's see if Minister Vivian can answer that question for us.
So, ever since I was a senior in high school, I always knew what I wanted to do. I can look back.
Wonderful.
I can look back at my memories book and see where I had specific things I needed to accomplish in life. And, I went with my own dream. I wanted
Yes.
to be a business education major, and that's what I did. So, I always knew. I never thought about anybody else's dream because I focused on my own. I focused on what I wanted to do in life. So, unfortunately, I didn't have that problem.
I understand. And that's great. That's again, when I think of my three children, there was one out of the three who knew exactly what she wanted to do at an early age, and that was Pastor Leslie. She said at 3 years old she wanted to be a preaching pastor. She followed the path throughout, her school, attending Christian school, and then going for her undergrad to Oral Roberts University, her master's from Regent University, her doctorate from Duke Divinity School. She followed that path, and nobody could shake her from that. But then again, everybody has their own way or their own path to follow. Sometimes it takes trying something else before you can really find out what it really is that you want to do. There are a lot of people who go to college, get degrees, but end up working in totally different areas unrelated to their degree. And then, as was in Sonny's case, there are a lot of people who may have followed the dreams that their parents had, because in actuality, it was their parents who really wanted to do this, didn't get the opportunity, so they wanted their child to do that while the parent is living vicariously through the child. It just so happened that this worked out for Sonny.
Yeah,
and
sure
so,
did.
but she didn't know when she was doing it. She really was doing it because her mother wanted her to. And then she began to say, hey, I kind of like this thing. And she, after trying a myriad of specialties in law, she found and made the decision herself to be a prosecutor and to fight for justice for her own people. And it worked out in her favor.
That shaped who she was. That shaped who she was.
It
so
really,
all those
really
experiences
did.
helped her. It really helped her.
Yes. I see Kashama said, I want to do music, producing, singing background for demos, and playing in a jazz band. My dad didn't think that music would pay the bills. See that? And so again, I think parents, yes, they can speak into the choices that their children have. But even as a parent, I think our role is not to push our children into a specific area, but it is really to help guide them into the area that God has and that they have for their own lives. And hey, for some parents, it may be difficult because you might totally disagree with what your child wants to do. But again, you have to trust that they'll get it right. And sometimes it takes going around the mulberry bush a few times for some, whereas others know right away. It depends on the child and depends on their personality and their style and their learning propensity and all of that. But you've got to allow them at some point, especially when you know you planted the seeds that you've needed to plant, the right to make their own decisions. Okay, thank you so much, Minister Vivian. Let's continue to move on, because as Sonny went through and matriculated through all of the schools that she attended, and then through her many jobs and all of the networks, and there were several. She was on Fox News, CNN, NBC, ABC, you name it. Court TV is where that was her first TV appearance on a show with Nancy Gray. Some of you may know who she is. But she went through all of these areas before finding her sweet spot on The View. And even when she got to The View, there was some hiccups along the way with some of the co-hosts and even some of the guests that she encountered. But this is what she said through all of the string of employment opportunities that came her way. She said this on page 87: there's a feeling I get when I know I'm home, when I know it's right. And so question number 9 is this: have you ever had that feeling, or do you have it now in your place of employment? Let's bring Lori back up. I think Lori may be retired, but you can speak from those days. Oh, you're not. Why was I thinking that you were already retired? Okay, I think you need to unmute yourself. Are you muted?
Yes, I am. Sorry.
There we go.
Yeah.
There we go.
I was
So have
saying,
you ever had that feeling, or do you have it now in your place of employment? When it
yes, I
feels
do.
right, it feels like home.
Yeah, the job that I'm in now, I've been in federal government for 30 some years. But the job I'm in now, I've been in for the last 5 years. And now when I started doing it, I said, oh, I can see with all those 20 some years of doing this job, doing something similar to it. Now that I'm here, I can see, how it made me a better person.
Sure.
And good at what I'm doing. And it is a sweet spot for me. So I said, I'm going to take it all the way out to retirement, what I'm doing.
Yes, I love it. And that's when you know it's right. You know you're in the place where you're supposed to be, because as Sunny said, it feels right, but also you have a sense of peace as well as a sense of purpose.
Yes,
you know you're there on assignment, so to speak. So I don't care, what area of employment you may be in, who you may be working for, or perhaps some of you may be working for yourselves. I still call that your call. When you have a calling, it doesn't just mean you're behind a pulpit. Doesn't just mean that you're working in a church. Your calling is wherever God sends you on an assignment to represent him, and to represent him well by who you are, by the words you speak, by your conduct, and by the quality of work that you have, and that standard of excellence. Because even scripture tells us that how excellent is thy name, O Lord, in all the earth. So because God is excellent and God lives within us, everything we do should be done with a standard and by a standard of excellence. And that's when you know, again, that you're working in and with purpose. Thank you so much for sharing that. Again, I don't want to be on too long, so we just got a couple more questions. Chapter 7 was loaded, y'all. I mean, it was loaded. This was the chapter on motherhood, and there were many issues that Sunny shared that are relatable to women. She talked about all of the things that she went through in terms of even before she had her children, the road getting there. And some of you women can maybe relate when she talked about her dating, and there was no holds barred. She said she dated a lot. And so I called it her date to mate approach, because with everybody she dated, in her subconscious, she had her list. Y'all know about the list. I know some of you had the list. Some of you may have the list right now, where there's certain things that you're looking for perhaps in a man, and you're not going to settle unless you have certain things on your list, if not all of those things. And Sunny was among those who had a list, and she was checking it off and knew right away whether or not she needed to continue the dating with that particular person. But then she got to the point where she actually met the man that she would marry. His name was Emmanuel. She called him Manny for short. Hostin, that's how she got her last name. And so she talked about her trouble with once they got married and wanted to have children. She talked about the fact that she had trouble with fibroids. Many women of color can identify with that, because we suffer more with fibroids than any other people group. And so she shared a lot of facts in that particular chapter, which are true. We just don't have time to read them. And then she also shared she had to have a myectomy. A myomectomy. Myomectomy. That's it. Myomectomy. In order to remove those fibroids. She talked about her IVF struggles, in vitro fertilization, because she couldn't have children. And so she needed to go through that, and the $30,000 that they spent taking out a home equity loan in order to pay for that, but also having, after the insurance ran out, she talked about so many different things in that chapter. She talked about having multiple miscarriages, as well as her unexpected trip to the emergency room. There was some drama, lots of drama in that particular chapter before her gifts were born. Gabriel, her firstborn son, named after the angel Gabriel, and then Paloma, that's her daughter's name, which was a Puerto Rican name. that she and her husband chose. So there's the next question. As a woman, what do you most identify with from that particular chapter? I'm going to bring Monique up again to answer that question. As a woman, what do you most identify with from that particular chapter?
So, I didn't date a lot.
Okay.
So, so,
That's okay.
so I don't have that in common. But I would say after having my girls, being overprotective, being afraid of putting them in daycare or sending them to a babysitter. I know she struggled with that, but we're working moms, so but that resonated with me in that she was just just fearful of what could happen.
Yes.
I remember having those feelings, with them being babies and toddlers, and not
Exactly.
being able to tell me, if someone did something to them. So having that fear, but like I said, you had to get over it because
Right.
we're working mothers, and we have to go to work. So
Mhm.
that really resonated with me. So I would
Yes.
I would say that.
Thank you. Thank you so
Hmm.
much. Things that resonated with me, again, without getting too personal, but fibroids, again, something that happens with a lot of women of color, and then ending up having to deal with those. And so there were a lot of relatable moments here, but I appreciate again Sunny's transparency here in discussing things that many people, may not hear about a lot because it may be considered taboo. She had 5 miscarriages. And so painful as that was, you can imagine every time she got pregnant and then, not wanting to tell or share with anyone because of the pain of what could happen, and what did happen in the past before her children were born with the IVF method that they had encountered. So we're almost to the end. Chapter 9 was devoted entirely to CNN, and if I were to subtitle that topic or that chapter, I would say "Here today, gone tomorrow, and back again," because it was like a revolving door. She was coming straight from the Fox network to CNN, from doing Fox News, and now having a huge contract negotiated where she was getting all of this money, but she didn't know the ropes because it was night and day between both of those networks. And so she had kind of like an ambivalent relationship, but then she finally hit her stride, and then she would leave and then come back again. Several things happened. It was such an interesting chapter while she was learning the ropes and finding her rhythm. But in this chapter, she shared her experience, and that she, one particular day, she needed was a much needed day off, and that she was shopping with her mother in a store in the same city where she lived in Westchester. And she talked about, which happens again to many people, how while she was shopping, and she wasn't dressed as she would be coming from work, she just had on some joggers and a cap. But there was a lady who worked at the store, a white woman, who was following her. You can guess why she was following her, because she thought that she was going to steal something. That's called racial profiling. And so she shares that story and how she literally had to, after the woman kept following her from a distance, never asking if she could help her. She literally had to have a conversation with this woman because she realized what she was doing. And so she talked about that, and then she talks about microaggressions and profiling. And I found that whole conversation to be really not just enlightening, because many of us people of color, have gone through similar incidents. And then she talked about a definition of white privilege according to her perspective, which I thought was very interesting. And so I just want to go straight into question number 11, and then we only have one more question left. Like Sunny, have you ever done anything in a desperate attempt to try and fit in? And while we're bringing up Lori to answer this question, I want to just say that Sunny had to do some things that she didn't necessarily want to do. But there was one incident that she shared in the book where she went in for an interview at the DA's office in DC. And because of the man that was interviewing her was old-fashioned in his belief, didn't believe that women should go into court wearing pants or pantsuits, there were other Black women who pulled her aside and said, hey, I'm saying this for your own good. We need women, excellent and brilliant women in positions of power. And if you really want to get this job, they shared with her, you need to wear a skirt. And one of the ladies in that department looked Sonny up and down and said, you look like you're about size 5. That's what size I am. Take this skirt and I'll take your houndstooth pants and let's switch this. And Sonny didn't want to do it. She refused, but then she called in, the lady who asked her to do that called in reinforcements. And so there were 3 brilliant Black women who had gone through the ropes and were in that office, women of power, and said, listen, if you want this job and we need you here, this is what you need to do. It doesn't take away who you are or what you're bringing to the table, but just get the job. Because if you can't get in the door, then you can't go where you need to go. And so, of course, she took the skirt off that she had on. She had come in dressed to the nines with her houndstooth skirt and matching jacket, took the skirt off, put on, or took the pants off, I should say. Took her houndstooth pants off, put on this black skirt. Thank God it matched. Crazy color, right? And it's fit her to the T. The other lady put on her pants, and Sonny put on her skirt. She went in, got interviewed, and got the job. And so there were things that she had to do that she didn't necessarily want to do, but she did it to fit in. The other thing was her name. She didn't come up with the name, nor did her family, to be called Sonny, but it was people when she was growing up, particularly when she was in high school and in college, that couldn't pronounce her name, the name that she was called, Asuncion, by her parents and her grandparents, and all of her African-American family, she said, could pronounce it, but automatically these people in other echelons, particularly white people, couldn't pronounce it. And so she allowed them to call her Sonny, which she shared in the book at some point that she regretted because it made them comfortable. And so that's why I want to ask this question, because sometimes it seems like we, particularly people of color, sometimes have to do things that have nothing to do with us, but to make the other people around us comfortable. So here's the question, Lori. Like Sonny, have you ever done anything in a desperate attempt to try and fit in?
Yes, but we grew up around white people. My dad was in the Navy.
Yes.
We lived on naval bases, went overseas. But when we came back, I lived in the South, Tennessee, which is considered the South. And I would get beat up because they kept saying I talked like a white girl. Girls, this is younger, And so I got tired of getting beat up. So I did my darndest to try to sound Southern to get through. And that's the only time that I remember that I tried to change myself.
Sure.
That just so I wouldn't get beat up. So.
Yeah, I understand. I can identify with that, because again, you hear people and you may be talking on the phone and they think you're one person, but when they see you, oh, I didn't realize you were Black. And so I've had those kinds of moments. I really, really have. It shouldn't make a difference. But again, it's the world in which we live. So thank you for answering that. And then we have the next chapter. We'll go quickly to the next chapter, rather, which was chapter 10. And then we only have one question after that. Chapter 10 was the chapter labeled Trayvon. And this was, of course, we all know the story of Trayvon Martin and his horrific killing. 17 years old, killed, and he was unarmed with just candy in his hands. It's just awful. And we know about Zimmerman and how he got off. But Sonny talks about how that story changed her life. And she knew at that moment that's all she wanted to do was represent the voice of the voiceless. She had to convince network executives at CNN that this was more than a local story. And because of that, it became, she was the first one to cover this at a national level after she convinced them, and they wouldn't cover it because they thought it was just a local story that would stay in Florida. And of course, we all know that it didn't. And so there were a myriad of things that went on with that. But let's go on to question number 12. It was so interesting, and we only have this last question, and then we're going to conclude. Question number 12: the two most important days in your life, according to a quote by Mark Twain, are the day you were born and the day you find out why. And Sunny believed, that she shared, that there are 3 days that define your life. And then Mark Twain failed to realize that there should have been a day sandwiched in between those 2 days. And so with that in mind, day 2, that Mark Twain didn't realize, would recognize what moment in a person's life. Let's bring up Vivian to answer that. Minister Vivian,
So
day 2 would recognize what moment in a person's life?
her passion, her purpose.
Exactly. And she put it this way: day 2 would be what you realize, not just your passion and your purpose, but she put it in a different way in saying it is the day you realize what you will not be, or who you will not be, and who you will not become.
Right.
And because there are always going to be forces around us, right? Who want us to fit in, who want us to make them comfortable or other people comfortable, who want us to be something that we are not. There was even a transparent moment where Sunny shared that when she was at CNN and she was trying to find her way through, she dyed her hair like Soledad O'Brien.
Right.
She started to her voice inflections like Soledad, because Soledad wasn't as opinionated as she was, so she dialed down her opinions like Soledad because she was trying to fit in. But then she came to herself and realized not just the day she was born in October 20th, 1968, but she realized that day 2 was what she was not going to do anymore. She was going to be authentically who she was. She was embracing every part of her cultural identity, her Blackness and her Hispanicness. And even if other people weren't all right with it, she was all right with it.
And that's what I was going to say. Yeah, she wanted to be authentic.
Exactly.
And she didn't worry about haters. She wanted her own voice,
Yes,
to be heard, not anyone else's voice. So that's where she found her purpose and her passion.
That's it. I love it. And then again, and now, as we know, for those of you who have watched her, she is walking in her purpose. Her dream was to be a broadcast journalist, to offer her opinions and her point of view, and particularly to lift up the voice of the voiceless, even against the opinions of others, even on the panel of co-hosts on The View. She is always authentic to what she does. And so she saved the last chapter for The View because she shared, again, what she has done and what she is doing with all of the cultural identity that she brings to her fight for justice, as her background as an attorney and a federal prosecutor allows her to stand in her truth. So again, the book, I Am These Truths, allows us to know that we need to be authentic to ourselves, to who we truly are and who God meant us to be. And once we find that out, again, it's not just the moment that we're born and the moment that we die. What are we doing with that dash in between? Are we living the life that we are meant to live? Are we doing it with passion and purpose? Because that's what really counts. And Sunny Hostin allows us to see that through her telling memoir. So I know this has been long, y'all, but there was so much in this book. And I trust that for those of you who have not read the book, that something that was said and discussed tonight would have allowed you to pique your interest and pick up the book and actually read it for yourself, because it talks about the climate that we're in now. So many things that we need to know in terms of the criminal justice system, the world in which we live, how we need to carry ourselves, how we need to be knowledgeable about not just who we are, but how we can be the voice of reason, and how we need to communicate in a way that is respectful, even with those who don't agree with our perspectives. So again, this has been a wonderful, wonderful time. I want you to answer a couple questions for me. Again, you see it on the screen. Would you like to have a virtual book club more often? And if so, how often? Please put it in the chat. Would you like to see this monthly? Would you like to see this bi-monthly? Or would you like to see this quarterly? And maybe some of you may say, well, I got so much going on. Maybe we can just have it twice a year. That's okay too. But I want to see, have my finger on the pulse of what you would like to do. I also want to keep in mind that we're going to be starting our Noonday Bible study again in March. So that is going to be a weekly event that's brought to you virtually. So keep that in mind. But I love reading, as you can tell. So do you, and I'm thankful for that. And if you want to keep this going, I also want you to put in the comments some books that you want to suggest that we have for one of our next virtual book clubs. I already have the next book. Well, I have a couple books. I'm reading Barack Obama's book, Promised Land, but I just got this one as well. Just As I Am by Cicely Tyson would be an excellent book as well. So what book titles would you suggest? I always have some that I can pull out, and we can do that in a moment's notice. I also want to say that as you're leaving your comments, how often you want to have this book club virtually, and also what book titles that you would like to see as a part of this. I want you to know that I appreciate you taking the time out of your busy schedules and having the interest to want to participate in a forum like this. I see someone agreeing that Cicely Tyson would be an excellent read. Pick up the book if you haven't done so already. I'm the old-fashioned person who would like to have the book in hand rather than the audio version, because I like to write in my book and ask myself questions, take notes and underline and highlight. So again, that's all the time. I really went over the time, but I was enjoying this so much, y'all, that I just wanted to hang out with you. We can't see each other in person, but this is the next very best thing. But I gotta let you go now. And so thank you again for being a part of this special launching of our very first book club. I see April Marshall wants to keep it going. I'm so thankful that you do. Let me hear from you. Again, keep it going. Even after this stops, you can continue to comment. And I want to hear how you thought this went and some other suggestions that you have, and how often, again, you want to see this book club virtually. God bless you. Know that you are in my thoughts and in my prayers. I love you all so much. Thank you to our co-hosts, to Vivian, Lori, and to Monique. And thank you to all of you. Have a wonderful night. Good night.